They fired me in front of everyone like a show. No warning, no explanation. Just a sentence that ended 18 years of loyalty in a single breath. It was 9:03 a.m. on a Thursday. I remember the exact time because the conference room clock ticked just loud enough to mock the silence that followed. Cole Maddox, the new CEO, who looked more like an influencer than a leader, stood at the head of the table in his slim-fit navy suit, flanked by his hand-picked tech prodigies. All fresh faces. All wide eyes and white sneakers. None of them knew what I had built. None of them cared. Effective immediately, he said, Evelyn Hart's position has been dissolved. Just like that. No thank you. No mention of Helix, the system that kept this company breathing. No nod to the sleepless nights, the crisis I'd navigated, the architecture I'd written when this company was nothing but a half-funded spreadsheet and hope. Around me, chairs squeaked. Pens clicked. Nobody looked up. Not even Jenathy, junior analyst I mentored for 2 years. The same girl who once cried in my office when her first deployment crashed. The same girl who now stared blankly at her notepad, pretending this wasn't betrayal. Was this what 18 years amounted to? My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I wasn't surprised. I had seen the signs months ago. I had prepared for this moment. But still, standing there with my access badge burning in my palm and my pride bruised in front of people who once called me the backbone of Lunaris, I asked myself a question I hadn't allowed in years. Did I really matter, or was I just a placeholder until someone trendier came along? Have you ever been pushed out of a place you helped build without even a thank you? Tell me in the comments. You're not alone. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I placed my badge on the table, nodded once, and walked out. And as the doors closed behind me, a small smile tugged at the corner of my lips. Not from joy. From certainty. They thought they had ended my chapter. What they didn't know is that I was already halfway through writing the next one. When I walked out of that conference room, I didn't head to the parking lot. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even breathe for a full 5 seconds. Instead, I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and stood there alone, surrounded by mirrored walls and silence so thick it echoed. They thought they'd erased me. What they didn't realize was that I had never really been inside their system to begin with. Not in the way they assumed. You see, when I joined Lunaris 15 years ago, the place was chaos wrapped in branding. Everyone talked about scale and synergy, but under the hood? It was duct tape, half-baked integrations, and 7 different cloud vendors duct-taped together by interns who thought JSON was a skincare brand. That's when they brought me in. Contract hire, no benefits, no welcome basket. Just a mess of logins and an email titled "Urgent Fix Needed." What I built wasn't flashy. No big launch. No ribbon cutting. Just a system that quietly did what no one else bothered to think about, kept everything from falling apart. I called it Helix. It wasn't just a software patch. It was a framework, a real-time data spine that linked every subsystem, every internal app, every API call without any of them knowing they were connected. It rerouted failures, validated transactions, self-healed during crashes. And it lived outside their firewall. Not for ego. For protection. I saw too many turnover emails, too many power grabs, too many people who smiled during onboarding and sharpened knives right after. So I kept Helix separate. A mirrored relay architecture hosted on a secured node under my own LLC, cloaked in routine server activity. To them, it just worked. To me, it was a lifeline. And over the years, Lunaris leaned on it more than they realized. Product launches, investor demos, even payroll, every major operation ran through Helix. But they never asked how. They didn't want to know. It didn't crash, so they assumed it was magic. And that was fine with me. After I got promoted to senior systems architect, I removed its name from internal documentation. Took down the notes. Killed the traceable breadcrumbs. Even Jenna, who shadowed me for 6 months, never once asked why she got ghost alerts on her dashboard, or why certain processes fixed themselves before support tickets were filed. Helix became the invisible backbone, and I became the architect no one could see. It was safer that way, because people like Cole Maddox, they don't respect what they don't understand, and they certainly don't ask questions about the foundation they're trying to paint over. That's why I didn't panic when he said my role was dissolved, because the only thing they ever had control over was my job title, not the system, not the code, not the heartbeat of the infrastructure they stood on. So I walked out, not broken, just unseen. And that's where my power started. Not in being loud, but in being the last one they forgot to erase. The one who held the spine while they smiled at the surface. They thought they fired a name on a badge, but I was never the badge. I was the architect, and the blueprint still answered to me. The morning I was fired, no one knew a countdown had already started. Not the interns who posted motivational quotes on Slack. Not the engineers rehearsing buzzwords for the next demo. And definitely not Cole Maddox, who thought he had the final word. But Helix knew. Months ago, when I started seeing shifts in leadership budget reviews, new hiring language, subtle whispers about modernization, I didn't panic. I coded. I wrote what I called Protocol E7, known to no one but me. A ghost protocol. It lived buried beneath Helix's logic core, silent and invisible. Its job wasn't to crash anything. That would be too obvious. Too loud. No, 7 was built for precision. A slow-burn defense mechanism designed to activate only if my admin credentials were revoked under hostile conditions like, say, an unexplained public firing without access transfer or legacy clearance. It didn't erase data. It didn't wipe logs. It simply began to shift things. Just enough. A permission delay here. A sync misfire there. A login loop that looked like a glitch, and a timestamp error that no one could replicate twice. To most, it would feel like the system was just tired. But behind the curtain, Helix was listening, watching, calculating. Because here's the thing about infrastructure. It doesn't scream when it's hurt. It hums. Quietly, relentlessly. Until the silence becomes a problem too big to ignore. And Cole? He never asked how anything worked. He didn't care about the threads holding it together, just the screens that looked good in investor decks. So when he stripped my access and handed me a severance packet like it was a parking ticket, he assumed that was the end. But he didn't understand what I'd built. He didn't understand who he had just unplugged. Because E7 wasn't some line of revenge code written out of spite. It was contingency. It was protocol. And when that elevator door closed behind me, when the building swallowed my silence and the sunlight hit my face, the signal was already live. I pulled out my phone, opened the Helix remote terminal apps that still worked, and watched as the first system log entry came in. Trigger acknowledged. Phase 1. Initiated. I didn't smile. Not yet. Because this wasn't the moment of justice. It was the inhale before the storm. They had made the mistake. And I had simply honored the design. The email came 2 days after they fired me. It wasn't from Cole. Of course not. CEOs don't send cleanup notes. It came from HR's at 7:12 a.m. with the subject line, Transition Status Update, Role Reassignment. I opened it from the quiet corner of my apartment, coffee still untouched on the windowsill. The message was short, sanitized. Effective immediately, your position has been redefined as an infrastructure transition consultant under CTO oversight. No direct reports. Assigned workspace to be updated. Badge access retained under limited protocol. That was their way of saying, you're not exactly fired, but you're no longer seen. And we'd like you to vanish quietly. I wasn't even angry. It was too calculated to be personal, and too cowardly to be honest. But the reality of it still hit like the cold of steel under warm skin. For 15 years, I had a corner office on the 4th floor. I built their systems, mentored their teams, trained their leadership. My door was never closed. Now I had no desk. Just a shared seat in an open bullpen near the second-floor server room. No nameplate, no wired connection, no storage, not even a drawer. When I arrived to collect my reassigned keycard, no one made eye contact. Jenna passed me in the hallway, her smile tight, formal, as if I were just another name on a legacy asset list. She didn't say anything. Not even hi. That silence is what stung the most. Not the loss of space, not the status, not even the demotion. It was the fact that people who once leaned on me, laughed with me, called me the backbone of Lunaris now pretended they didn't recognize me at all. I sat at that shared desk for 3 hours the first day. Didn't speak, didn't plug in. Just watched the new hires float past me like I was a coffee cart or a misplaced piece of furniture. The new Team Cole's hand-picked digital visionaries all looked like they belonged on a TED Talk stage. Polished. Neutral colors. Perfect posture. They spoke in phrases like quantum adaptability and cloud-first recalibration, as if saying something fast and confidently made it real. None of them had written a single line of stable code. I listened to one of them ask another where the server logs were stored. Another one tried to use a front-end framework on a database migration. It was like watching someone use a spoon to screw in a bolt. Still, I said nothing. Not out of weakness, but because I wanted to understand how deep the erasure would go. And it went deep. Meeting invites stopped appearing in my calendar. Internal documents were scrubbed of my annotations. Presentations I once led now had Jenna's initials in the metadata. It was as if I had never existed. They weren't just replacing me. They were rewriting the timeline. Removing my name from the story. Replacing architecture with aesthetics. Function with fashion. Legacy with gloss. And that's when it hit Menno with anger, but with clarity. They weren't trying to fire me. They were trying to forget me. But forgetting someone doesn't undo the blueprint they left behind. And I had always designed Helix to remember. Thursday morning came with a meeting invite I hadn't asked for. It wasn't addressed to me directly. Just a generic all-staff calendar ping titled, Innovation Sprint. Rethinking the Backbone. Someone from HR muttered something earlier in the week about maintaining optics. So I showed up. Not because I wanted to. Because I needed to see just how far they were willing to go. The demo hall looked different. Chairs arranged in careful rows. Branding banners on every wall. A giant slide looped on the main projector screen. A new era of scalable infrastructure. The irony was too thick to cut. I took a seat in the back. Far right corner. No name, no acknowledgement. Just another ghost in the room. Then Jenna walked on stage. She wore a silk blouse and the kind of smile you learn to fake in leadership workshops. Standing next to her was someone I didn't recognize, tall, mid-20s, probably from Cole's former firm, holding a remote like it was a mic at a product launch. Today, Jenna began, we're proud to unveil the future of Lunaris' architecture. A system that's lighter, faster, and built for scale. I sat still. Watched the screen flash with flowcharts and UX mockups. They looked sleek, clean, modern. Except they weren't new. The routing patterns, mine. The validation logic, still Helix. Even the system heartbeat widget just repackaged with a darker font. They hadn't built anything. They'd just slapped makeup on a machine they didn't understand. Then came the moment. The guy next to Jenna, his name was Kellen, apparently pulled up a config panel and said, and here's our new floating token distributor. We've streamlined subnet management into a single layer. He blinked. What? That term didn't even make sense. It was technobabble completely misused. Like calling a compass a microwave. I raised my hand. Just slightly. Instinct more than decision. Jenna saw it. And for half a second, her voice hitched. Then she smiled again. Bigger this time, but colder. Evelyn, she said, sweet but sharp, we appreciate your presence. But as you're no longer part of the active team, let's give space to the architects leading the transition. Her voice echoed through the room. No one turned. No one said anything. Just a slow hush. Not dramatic, just hollow. I lowered my hand, nodded once, and stood up. No anger. No argument. I walked to the back, pushed open the door, and stepped into the hallway. The carpet muted my footsteps. No one followed. I made my way to the coffee machine in the corner lounge. It sputtered weakly as it filled the paper cup in my hand. I sat on the old bench across from it. Didn't drink. Just stared at the swirling surface. And that's when I noticed him. A young intern, Max, I think, standing by the hallway, phone still in his hand, frozen like he had witnessed something he wasn't supposed to see. He'd recorded it. The moment. The shutdown. The silence. We made eye contact for just a second. He flushed, lowered the phone, and hurried away. By that afternoon, I heard whispers near the elevators. Did you see what happened to Evelyn? They just shut her down mid-meeting. But no one said anything to me. No one checked in. No one asked if I was okay. That kind of silence? It doesn't scream. It settles, like dust. I finished the coffee. Cold now. Then pulled out my phone, tapped into Helix, and checked the logs. The system was still listening. And so was I. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, the room lit only by the soft glow of my monitor and the dull hum of the air purifier. The coffee cup from earlier still sat beside me untouched, half full, cold. I wasn't tired. I was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens after too much noise. My inbox was still open. No new messages. No apologies. No acknowledgement of what had happened in that room earlier. Just silence. Corporate silence. Polished and absolute. I opened Helix. The real Helix. The one no one else had ever seen, the original console. Layers of obfuscation, redundant routes, and a private access key buried so deep it only responded to a physical device I'd registered 5 years ago. I logged in. Checked the logs. Everything looked stable. 1 rename attempt blocked. 2 failed pings from unrecognized credentials. Auto restore activated. They were poking around, testing doors they didn't have keys to. And Helix was holding the line. Then the alert hit. 8:14 p.m. Origin. Unregistered device. Internal Lunaris network. Request. Root restructure attempt. I froze. A root restructure wasn't a maintenance slip. It wasn't something a junior engineer accidentally ran. It was a deliberate override request. An attempt to claim ownership. I clicked into the logs, ran a trace, filtered headers manually. The ID was clear. Kata. Rivers at Lunaris. Com. Jenna. She wasn't just replacing me. She was trying to rewrite me. 3 years ago, I covered for her when she accidentally sent an unsecured data cluster to a third-party vendor. I fixed it. I took the heat. I made it disappear. Now she was trying to erase the very thing I built. Quietly. Strategically. As if I had never existed. My hands hovered over the keyboard. For a moment, I considered activating a full lockout. Cut her access. Trigger alarms. Force a confrontation. But no. This wasn't the time to scream. It was the time to watch. I opened the secondary terminal, typed in a single line. Activate, watch, mode, trace, source stealth, log, channel shadow. The command blinked back. Monitoring initiated. No flashing lights, no warnings. Just a silent tether connecting me to every step they took from this moment forward. I shut the laptop. And for the first time in days, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled, letting the betrayal settle not as rage, but as data. Because now I wasn't guessing anymore. I was tracking. Have you ever watched someone you mentored try to take what you built? They thought you wouldn't notice. But you always did. Share your story below, someone out there needs to hear it. The game had changed. They wanted to erase me. But now, I would be the ghost they couldn't outrun. It started small. The first crack showed up the next morning, just after 9 a.m. An internal email thread that looped mid-reply. Then a time-tracking module froze for one of the HR team leads. A finance intern submitted a budget report that disappeared somewhere between send and submitted. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screamed sabotage. Just friction. Lag. The kind of things that made people refresh twice instead of once. The kind that made teams whisper, "Must be a glitch," and move on. But I knew better. Helix had entered phase 2. That meant micro-stutters in permissions, slight desyncs in version control. Scheduled processes staggered just enough to cause inconsistencies across departments, but never enough to be traceable. It was like letting air out of a tire, one slow hiss at a time. I monitored everything from home. Each log entry showed up like a heartbeat. 10:22 a.m. Delay. Payroll API timeout. 10:41 a.m. Sync error. KRM contact list version conflict. 11:06 a.m. Redirect loop triggered. Onboarding portal. I imagined the offices. Cole pacing, impatient. Jenna overcompensating. Kellen probably calling IT with a tone that sounded more urgent than informed. And yet, no one mentioned my name. Not out loud. But I could feel it. In the data. In the way their diagnostics pinged old routes. In the desperate searches for documentation that had mysteriously stopped existing after I was erased. The cracks were no longer theoretical, they were lived. Lunaris had built its shiny new vision on a foundation they never understood, and now, that foundation was shifting beneath them. And still, I said nothing. Not because I didn't care. Because they needed to feel it. To truly feel what it means to underestimate the architect while showing off the facade. That Thursday, a senior project lead attempted to reprocess a client request. It failed 3 times before the system redirected her to a recovery queue that didn't technically exist in their current infrastructure map. It existed in Helix, deep in its fallback logic. She escalated it. Jenna reviewed the log. I watched remotely as Jenna ran a trace script and stared at a folder labeled Legacy, Buffer, EVH. She paused. Hesitated. Then, she renamed it. No credentials, no authorization. Just hubris. The command went through, but the folder didn't change. Helix recorded the attempt, restored the label, and rewrote the access log to make it appear untouched. To her, it would seem like a successful rename. To me, it was proof. They were reaching for control, but grabbing smoke. And I just sat there. Watching. Logging. Waiting. I didn't want chaos. I wanted clarity. Because systems don't collapse in fire. They unravel in silence. And Lunaris was beginning to fray at the edges. By Friday morning, the murmurs inside Lunaris had shifted from tech confusion to quiet concern. Internal systems were out of sync. Client platforms froze mid-transaction. Meetings were rescheduled twice because calendar invites kept disappearing. Someone mentioned rebuilding from scratch. I almost laughed. That afternoon, an email arrived not to my work inbox, which no longer existed, but to my personal one. Subject line. Notice of legal review. Lunaris Technologies. No greeting, no signature, just a cold PDF attached. Inside, they accused me of unauthorized retention of intellectual property, of interfering with internal systems, of violating my exit agreement. There were no names in the document, but the meaning was clear. They were coming for me. I read it twice, then closed the file, stood up slowly, and walked to the small metal cabinet by my window. The box was still there. The same box I carried out of the building. Inside, my Skyline mug. A photo from my college graduation. And at the very bottom folded, slightly warped yellow folder I hadn't opened in years. I pulled it out. Saturday down. Opened it gently. Inside were diagrams hand-drawn in pencil on vellum sheets. My handwriting. My initials. Page after page of Helix's architecture. Node balancing trees. Filovaire logic. Security Protocol Overlays. Timestamp: April 12, 2015. Signature: E. Hart. This wasn't nostalgia. This was proof. Helix wasn't theirs. It never had been. The original schematic predated their incorporation. The hosting was registered under my own LLC. The server logs? Backed up on an encrypted external drive completely separate from Lunaris infrastructure. What I had given them wasn't ownership. It was access. And access can be revoked. I forwarded everything: folder scans, design history, system logs to my attorney. She called back 15 minutes later. Her voice was calm, unshaken. "Evelyn," she said, "they just handed you the one thing they never wanted you to have: leverage." I sat in silence after the call. Let the weight of it settle in my chest. Not anger. Not vengeance. Just confirmation. All those years of quiet work. Of being overlooked, replaced, minimized. They thought I wouldn't fight back. But I didn't need to fight. I just had to show my signature. Have you ever had to prove you were the one who built what they tried to take? If your name was on the blueprints, say it. And share your story below. Because the truth doesn't disappear just because they pretend not to see it. This wasn't about a job anymore. It was about authorship, about integrity, and about showing them, once and for all, that erasing my name wouldn't erase the foundation they still stood on. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning 9:00 a.m. sharp. It was supposed to be routine. A quarterly investor update. Slides. Buzzwords. Assurances. But I knew something was off the moment Helix flagged the shared file upload. The attachment had come from Jenna's accountant audit packet meant for distribution during the call. Standard protocol. Except Helix had a rule. Any file containing legacy schema diagrams would be mirrored to my shadow console. So, when I opened the packet from my apartment, I saw it immediately. My routing logic. My original redundancy map. My name. Faint in the lower corner of the draft slide, still embedded in the metadata they forgot to clean. And, just like that, I was in the room. Not physically. But Helix was listening. Recording every click. Every document viewed. Every screen shared on the video call. I watched from the live dashboard as 12 investor logins connected. New York. London. Tokyo. Zurich. The biggest names behind Lunaris capital flow. At the head of the table sat Cole, tight smile, suit too pressed. Jenna beside him, flipping through digital slides with studied calm. "Thank you all for joining us," Cole began. "We want to be transparent about the recent system challenges. We've traced the cause to legacy code complications architecture that's no longer aligned with our current strategy." Some heads nodded, others just stared. They were used to excuses. But then it happened. One voice, crisp and quiet, cut through the air. "Who owns Helix?" Cole blinked. "Excuse me?" "The system," the man said. "Helix, is it proprietary to Lunaris?" Silence followed. I recognized the voice from the metadata stream. Graham Ellison, founding investor. One of the original seed partners from the early funding rounds. And not someone who asked rhetorical questions. Cole stammered. "It was developed internally. Years ago. By our former infrastructure team. The design's been updated to reflect new priorities." There was a pause. A long one. Then Graham spoke again. "That's interesting," he said. "Because I remember seeing that design before Lunaris even had a dev budget." He looked off screen. Then back. "I met Evelyn Hart in 2016. We were seated together at a tech summit in Boston. She sketched something on a napkin while explaining her theory of invisible architecture. She said, and I quote, 'It's not about controlling the data, it's about stabilizing the nervous system beneath it.'" Cole didn't respond. Graham smiled. "I still have the napkin." Across the console, I saw multiple viewers go silent. Camera mics muted. Notes paused. They weren't just confused anymore. They were concerned. Not because of Helix. But because of the lie, they were just now realizing they had been sold. The slide deck closed early. The call ended 20 minutes ahead of schedule. No reassurances. No closing statements. Just questions. Expensive ones. And in the quiet of my apartment, I sat back in my chair, finally letting the weight shift. Not out of vengeance. Out of recognition. The kind that doesn't need a press release, just a truth that finally landed where it needed to. And this time, when my name was said, no one tried to delete it. It came 2 days after the investor meeting. Not from a recruiter. Not from a headline-chasing firm trying to spin a scandal into a hiring win. No press release. No pitch deck. Just a single email. Subject line. Let's build something that deserves you. The sender, Ava Lynn. The name stopped me for a second. Ava was a junior systems engineer when I first met her 7 years ago, back when her company, Corvexa Labs, was nothing more than a rented loft, 3 desks, and a whiteboard full of ideas written in dry erase marker that barely worked. She used to call me when she hit architecture walls. Not for solutions, but to understand how to ask better questions. She once spent 3 nights trying to reverse engineer a traffic balancing protocol because she didn't want to use someone else's shortcut. Now, she was CEO. Her email was short. I know what you built, and I know what they tried to take. We're not interested in resumes. We're interested in values. No titles, no ego. Just real infrastructure, built by real minds. We're building a platform that protects people, not just data. And I want you to build its brain. That was it. No attachments. No, dear Miss Hart. No pitch about changing the world in 18 months or exiting in 5. Just trust. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I read the message 3 times, closed my eyes, and remembered how it felt to work not for validation, but for vision. By that evening, I replied with one word. Yes. No counteroffer. No negotiation. No forwarding the message to legal. Just, yes. Because this time, I wasn't entering through the back door. I wasn't being slotted into a role that came with limits. This time, I was choosing. At Corvexa, I didn't rebuild Helix. I reinvented it. We called it Helix, only a nod to its roots, but born from a different place. No hidden triggers. No ghost protocols. Just transparency. The kind of system designed not to retaliate but to prevent retaliation from being necessary in the first place. My new team didn't ask me how to sell it. They asked me how to protect people with it. And that was all I needed to hear. It didn't make everything that happened at Lunaris disappear. But it gave it shape. It gave it meaning. It gave me back something no resignation, no legal win, no viral moment could. Direction. I wasn't starting over. I was finally starting right. Collapse doesn't always come with alarms. Sometimes, it walks in quietly wearing a company lanyard and a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. By the time I settled into my new role at Corvexa, the cracks inside Lunaris had stopped being whispers. They were patterns. Their internal reports began surfacing in niche tech forums, developers asking if anyone else had noticed strange API behavior. A regional manager posting anonymously about system integrity decay. Then, a line in a newsletter caught my eye. When you cut out the architect, don't be surprised when the building creaks. It wasn't a headline. It didn't need to be. Cole stopped appearing on internal comms. Jenna was removed from all public-facing roles. And the new interim CTO, a finance executive. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't trying to rebuild anymore. They were trying to contain the fallout. Clients began pulling back quietly, at first. Budgets froze. Product roadmaps were postponed, pending platform review. But I didn't gloat. I didn't forward the articles to anyone. Didn't text, "I told you so," to former colleagues. I simply observed. Watched from a distance as they tried to fix a system they never really understood because they never took the time to ask how it was made. They had replaced stability with style. And now they were left with slides that didn't sync, dashboards that failed to load, and an engineering team that couldn't trace the origin of their own infrastructure decay. There was one moment, though, that stayed with me. A friend, one of the few still left, incidents me a photo, taken from the one-tooth floor of Lunaris headquarters. The building looked pristine from the outside. Glass, chrome, minimalist lighting. But in the image, one hallway was dark. Lights flickering. Empty chairs. A temporary sign taped to the wall that read, "This area under technical review. Please avoid unnecessary access." It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. But to me, it said everything. They didn't just lose a system. They lost the ability to tell the truth about how they got there. The day Corvexa onboarded its fifth client, I stood on the rooftop patio of our co-working space. The sun was setting behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the buildings. From that height, I could see Lunaris headquarters across the river. Still tall. Still reflective. Still pretending everything was under control. But I knew better. The collapse had already happened. It didn't need headlines. It didn't need lawsuits. It didn't need my voice yelling into the void. Because some structures don't fall with thunder. They rot from the inside out. And all you have to do is wait long enough to watch the shine wear off. 1 week after Helix 1 went live, I stood on the rooftop of Corvexa's new office, coffee in hand, wind pressing gently against my coat, the city stretching wide and quiet around me. It wasn't a victory lap. It wasn't even relief. It was stillness. A kind of calm that comes not from winning but from surviving with your name intact. Across the skyline, Lunaris headquarters still stood tall. Same reflective glass. Same logo, printed in chrome. But I knew what was behind those windows now. I'd walked those halls. I'd watched their silence take shape. And I'd felt what it meant to be written out of a story I helped build. And still, I didn't wish them harm. What I felt instead was clarity. Because the truth is, they didn't just try to erase my name. They tried to teach me that silence meant defeat. That being unseen meant I didn't matter. That if you walk out quietly, it means they've won. But they were wrong. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes, it's strategy. Being unseen doesn't mean you have no power. It means you have space to decide when and how you want to be seen again. And walking away? That's not weakness. That's freedom. At Lunaris, they taught me how to code under pressure, how to lead without credit, how to carry weight that wasn't mine. But what they never taught me, what I had to learn on my own, was this. You don't have to fight to be right. You just have to last long enough for the truth to surface. And when it does, it speaks louder than any presentation ever could. Helix 1 isn't just a system. It's a boundary. A declaration. A quiet reminder that just because you don't raise your voice doesn't mean you don't own the room. If you've ever been overlooked, replaced, or written off only to rise again stronger, this story is yours too. Share your moment below. And if you're still waiting for it, stick around. Some systems may fail, but the right ones always restart. I took a final sip of coffee, looked across the river one last time, then turned my back to the building that once taught me everything except how to forget who I was. And I walked back inside, ready to build something without having to disappear to do it.